start? And which players should you sit in the ever-important final week of the fantasy football regular season? It's week 14. It's must-win time. I'm here to give you the starts and the sits for week 14. So if that sounds good, spike the like button and don't forget to subscribe for the Fantasy Football Playoffs, where I will be providing my starts and my sits for week 15, 16, and 17 to help you win your fantasy football league. Let me know in the comments any questions you have about your lineup. I'll try to give you my best guess, my best advice on who you should start. Let's get started with my 4 starts and my 4 sits at every position. Beginning the quarterback position. Tua turned the ball over. That's at least usually what I call him as a Patriots fan. But this week, I like Tua. I like him a lot against the New York Jets. Typically, Tua has actually played really well against this good Jets defense over the past couple of years. This year, it's the worst version of the Jets defense. Clearly, obviously, right? And they could have an injury to their big-time cornerback Sauce Gardner. That's really going to hurt them cover Tyreek Hill. That's going to hurt them from covering Jalen Waddle. And Tua himself is playing fantastic, even in a spot where we thought he would struggle, right? Cold, outdoors, primetime game against a good opponent. All the things that people worry about when it comes to the Dolphins and Tua. He actually played pretty well against the Packers. It wasn't really his fault. It had more to do with their defense, in all honesty. And in the second half, he was cooking. If not for some fourth down failures, I think the Dolphins get right back in that game. So Tua has been fantastic. 9 touchdowns in the last 3, back-to-back 300-yard performances, including against the Packers. The other was against the Patriots at home in Miami, where he is going to be this week. Hot, humid Miami. He always plays his best in these spots as a favorite at home. Start Tua. Our second start at the quarterback position for the ever-important Week 14 is Will Levis. Yup, I said it. Will Levis versus Jacksonville. I'm telling you, Will Levis is going to have a big game. He's playing Jacksonville, and it's at home, and he is going to torch the worst pass defense and worst defense in the NFL. Will Levis is playing a defense that allows 2 passing touchdowns a game and a 110 passer rating per game, guys. Jacksonville's defense is putrid. It's a Calvin Ridley revenge game. Levis is an explosive passer who's been playing much better, just like his other counterpart from the same draft, Bryce Young. They've been playing a lot better lately. People haven't really been noticing, though, when it comes to Will Levis. I think he puts the world, the NFL world, on notice with a big performance against Jacksonville, and I think he helps you out in fantasy if you're desperate for a quarterback start. The third start at the quarterback position is Baker Mayfield versus the Raiders. Now, some people might say, I'm not going to start Baker after he struggled against Carolina. Well, look, Baker's been a QB1 this year. He's been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL this season in real life, and I think Baker Mayfield is going to have a big bounce back. Mike Evans, there's no one that can handle him in the secondary of the Raiders. Jack Jones is too little. He can't contain him. And I think this could be a little bit of a shootout, which forces Baker to throw the ball a little bit more. And when you think about Carolina in that matchup historically, he's struggled with Carolina. I think for a variety of reasons. Canales being the new head coach, he's obviously the former offensive coordinator of Baker, knows him well, knows the offense well. He can give those tips to Evero, who's done a good job against Baker throughout his career in general, and Baker himself played for the Panthers. So there must be some sort of information they hold on him in terms of what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he's good at, what he's not good at, a good scouting report per se, right? So Baker struggles against the Panthers, but not the Raiders here, the 8th worst team against quarterbacks. Start Baker Mayfield. Sam Darnold against the Atlanta Falcons. I like Sunshine Sam here at home in the Dome against the Falcons. The Falcons are the 7th worst team versus quarterbacks I could see a little bit of a shootout here. It's possible against Kirk Cousins, as this is a potential Kirk Cousins revenge game. And Darnold has just been consistent in fantasy. Like, there's no reason to sit him against this bottom 10 defense against quarterbacks when he has at least 2 touchdowns in 5 of 6 games. Quarterback sits. Geno Smith against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are not great against quarterbacks overall, but they were great against Geno in the first outing. That was at home for Geno. This time it's on the road. Seattle only managed 10 offensive points in that game. One of the touchdowns, I believe, if they even scored a touchdown, it might have been 3 field goals. All right, it might have been 9 points. I might be mistaken because the one touchdown was from a pick six. So, yeah, Geno couldn't even put up a touchdown, and you know he's going to throw a pick in the end zone. Like, that happens every week. I think the biggest problem for Geno in this game is going to be the pressure that Arizona puts on him. And you're probably saying, pressure? Arizona? That doesn't sound right. Well, Arizona is really good at blitzing. And I think that can give Geno some problems in terms of him stepping up and stepping around and trying to avoid that pressure and trying to find a guy open. I don't think the Seahawks will be able to run the ball all that effectively either, which is going to put him in awkward, tough situations when throwing the ball. So I think the offensive line problems of Seattle will catch up with them in this game, and I think Geno will struggle to put up points. He might put up yards, but points is a different story, so I think his ceiling is rather low. Kyler Murray against Seattle. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, as you could notice, right? I have Kyler Murray in multiple fantasy football leagues, and I considered playing Will Levis over him. I actually wanted to play Will Levis over him in a must-win game in Week 14 because I think the ceiling is higher, believe it or not. You know, against Seattle, Kyler was awful the first time. He had 11 fantasy points in the first outing, which was only a couple weeks ago. So the thing that I notice in terms of trends when it comes to playing back-to-back divisional games in a short time span is they're often very defensive. In fact, I would expect the under to hit in this game. The Cards, they only scored 6 points against Seattle in Seattle, and I think Cardinals could win this game for sure, but I don't see it being through Kyler Murray. I don't see it being through the air. I think it's going to be a run-heavy approach. I think it's going to be a defensive-led game plan, and I think Kyler is going to play conservatively. He might use his legs a little bit, but what really gave Kyler problems was the blitz packages and the complex pressure looks of Mike Macdonald's scheme. I don't expect the Cardinals to really put the pressure on Kyler to make all these throws down the field. I expect it to be a conservative effort where they run the ball. So I think that Kyler is actually kind of a struggle start this week in Week 14. Matthew Stafford against the Bills. This one's probably a little bit more obvious. The Bills are the 3rd best team in the NFL against quarterbacks this season in fantasy. Plus, the Bills have a sneaky good pass rush. I don't expect the Rams' home field advantage to really have a factor or play a big factor here, as there's going to be plenty of Bills Mafia in the crowd. I think Greg Rousseau and Von Miller could torch these tackles who have struggled consistently lately, and they just struggle to constantly protect Stafford. On top of that, the corners, the size, and the ability of Benford and Douglas match up pretty well with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, who are both guys that are kind of not fast, but they're kind of quick, but more physical targets. And I expect the Bills corners to shadow them really well. So I think Stafford's actually going to struggle here. I think for the Rams to have success offensively, it's going to have to be on the ground. So I would sit Stafford. I don't see a huge ceiling for this potential Hall of Famer. Kirk Cousins versus his former Vikings. I would sit him as well. I know that it's a revenge game and you might be intrigued, but the Vikings defense is chaotic, and when a quarterback struggles, they really struggle. They allow the 4th most yards to quarterbacks, but they also allow the same amount of interceptions as they do touchdowns, okay? So yardage could come for Cousins, but don't expect a lot of touchdowns. Expect the Falcons to struggle a little bit in the red zone. So Cousins has not looked good. His arm has looked shot, and the ability to throw the ball into tight zone coverage that the Vikings do play, they're going to bring a lot of hybrid and complex blitzes, and the thing about Cousins is you know where he's going to be at all times, right in the middle of the pocket. He can't move, and his arm is not very strong, so I expect the Vikings to give him a ton of issues. Those are my 4 quarterback sits. Moving on to the running back position with our running back starts, Tyrone Tracy versus the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are second worst in yards per attempt, 31st in football against the running backs this season. And Tracy is electric. I just love this young player. I think he is going to be the catalyst of the Giants offense. They know they have a bad offensive line. They know they can't really protect Drew Lock. They know that Drew Lock is not a guy they want to be throwing 40 times. Tracy, even when it was indicated that Singletary might get a little bit more play, and he did against Dallas on Thanksgiving early in the game, as soon as Singletary started to struggle, Tracy started to take over again. It's clear, it's obvious who the superior back is. It's clear, it's obvious the way the Giants need to play this game, and it's a great matchup, so I like Tracy here. Isaac Guerendo versus Chicago. Guerendo is expected to be the primary back for Kyle Shanahan's San Francisco 49er attack. Chicago has struggled against the run, especially lately. They're 29th in yards per attempt on the season, and if you look at the last month, they've been awful against the running backs. So I like Guerendo. He's fast. I love his ability to hit the hole and explode, and I could see a couple explosive runs for home runs in this game. 49ers desperately need this game. I think they're going to rely on the running back that they trust the most, which is Guerendo. I mean, all these other guys they're picking up off the street, or Patrick Taylor, a practice squatter, without Mason, without McCaffrey, Guerendo's going to play a lot, and he's going to get most of the on-the-ground work. Tony Pollard versus Jacksonville. I think Pollard has a bounce back against a defense that has the 10th most rushing yards allowed, 5th in touchdowns allowed to running backs, and 6th in targets allowed. Jacksonville does allow a lot of fantasy volume to this position. I think the Titans, this is one of the games that they could actually play from ahead due to some explosive passes from Will Levis and their good defense. And I think Pollard could finish this game strong in the second half, catching a couple passes on screens, but also delivering a touchdown and about 20 attempts on the ground. They want to get back to running the ball after not being able to do that against the Commies. Next up, we've got Sincere McCormick versus Tampa Bay. Sincere McCormick, you might not even know who he is. He's probably going to be the Raiders' starting running back this week against Tampa Bay. McCormick actually is going to be taking on a defense that allows the second most targets to the running back position. They allowed a lot of catches and targets to this position, and McCormick could see about 15 to possibly 20 carries, depending on the game script. I wouldn't be surprised. He had 12 carries, I believe, against Kansas City. He had over 60 yards, which is something that not a lot of running backs have done all season against Kansas City. He was very efficient. I think he's going to be a very promising player for the rest of the season. I think it starts here against Tampa, a team that's not as good as they used to be against running backs. Running back sits. Let's talk about the Chiefs. I would sit both their running backs, Pacheco and Hunt, because I think there's too much of a 50-50 unknown split here, especially with Pacheco kind of getting back to full health. I think a lot of people will want to start Pacheco, but I would try not to if I had better options, because the Chargers are really good against running backs. And being that it's a massive split here, Hunt could have the red zone work, Hunt could have short yardage work, Pacheco could have first and second down work. It's very confusing. I would not play those running backs against this good of a defense against the run. 5th best against running backs, 3rd in touchdowns allowed, rushing. So I don't like the Chiefs this week running the ball. Then we have Nick Chubb against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're 5th in yards per attempt allowed. And then you also have the Ford factor. Ford played really well against Denver, a really solid run defense as well, and Ford actually looked better than Chubb in that game on the ground. So there's always the factor that Stefanski might go with the hot hand, which could be Ford at times. Chubb still looks a little bit slow, a little bit less of that gas than he used to have. So I think Chubb is a guy that just doesn't have the ceiling that he had a couple years ago with his impeccable ability to hit home runs. I think he's a little bit slower, a little bit less than he used to be. You're going to have to wait for 2025 to potentially get back the old Nick Chubb. Jacksonville running backs against Tennessee. That's talking about ETN and Bigsby. I would not start either one. Tennessee is 6th best in yards per allowed to running backs. Jeff Simmons, Tavondre Sweat. It's very difficult to run against this defense, especially up the middle. And with Mac Jones, what do you think Tennessee is going to do? They're going to try to stop the run, especially after they were embarrassed against Washington on the ground. Tennessee has not allowed that many yards and that good of a performance on the ground all year. I think a lot of that stemmed from the zone read and read option game of Jaden Daniels. That is not the case with Mac Jones. I'm faster than Mac Jones, okay? The running back sits, finishes off with Gus Edwards against the Chiefs. The Chiefs are the best team against running backs this year defensively. They're also the best in yards per attempt, which plays in hand with why I like Sincere McCormick, but why I don't like the upcoming running back here, Gus Edwards. Edwards does not look explosive. He does not look elusive. He has not looked it all year. He's looked like a guy that shouldn't be starting on an NFL team. J.K. Dobbins went down. That's the only reason Edwards is getting opportunity, because he knows the system and he knows this offense, under Greg Roman, but in terms of performance, he has not been efficient. He has not been good. So I would sit Gus Edwards. Our wide receiver starts. 4 wide receiver starts. Let's start off with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine against Jacksonville. Westbrook-Ikhine has scored 8 touchdowns in 8 games. It's time to take notice. It's time. Okay? All I know in life, the one guarantee I have is that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is going to score a touchdown. So start him. It's a Calvin Ridley revenge game, but you don't think Jacksonville is going to try to take Ridley out of the game and leave Westbrook-Ikhine one-on-one in the red zone? Will Levis is going to hit him. Trust me, because 2 touchdowns a game Jacksonville allows. One of them's going to be to Westbrook-Ikhine. Next up, we've got DeAndre Hopkins versus the Chargers. Chargers play a ton of zone coverage. I think Mahomes will be successful dinking and dunking against this coverage. And being that Derwin James will likely be shadowing Kelsey, I think that it will be a lot of D-Hop. I could see him catching 8 to 10 passes in this game. I think his floor is very high in this matchup. Our third wide receiver start is Jacoby Myers, my guy. Jacoby Myers was phenomenal against Kansas City. He was good the week before that. I think he'll play well against Tampa. Tampa is not very good against the pass, specifically over the middle of the field. Jacoby is great over the middle of the field. I expect Aiden O'Connell to hit him time after time after time on third down like he did against the Chiefs. Marquise Valdes-Scantling versus the New York Giants. They're one of the worst teams against the explosive pass. Valdes-Scantling, what he is known for and what he does best is run by you, fly by you, and catch the football for 6. I think he could have multiple big catches. I think this is a game where he could have 3 to 4 for like 120 yards. It's very possible. It's at least worth the risk, because MVS is a touchdown in a big play waiting to happen against this absolutely horrendous Giants perimeter cornerback group. Our wide receiver sits. Let's begin with Adam Thielen, coming off an excellent game against the Bucs. Just like Jacoby Myers, a savvy middle-of-the-field threat, very good against Tampa. Against the Eagles, he's just not going to be quick enough, twitchy enough to separate from their coverage. They have great corners. Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, their corners are playing absurdly well, and their secondary has been the best in football this season. I don't expect Thielen to have a very high ceiling. Maybe like a good floor if Bryce Young and the Panthers are trailing late. Maybe Thielen gets some volume, but I don't see him as worth the start, given that he's probably not a normal starter for you anyways, I hope. Then we've got Rome Odunze against the San Francisco 49ers. I don't like Rome Odunze in this matchup because this is the best pass defense that Caleb has faced in quite some time. On top of that, these corners for the Niners are really well matched up to Rome. Like, they got size, they got length, they've got enough speed to hang. They've got that frame that allows them to be physical with Rome Odunze, and the whole skill set of Rome is to be able to box out and catch the football. On top of that, Chicago has very much shifted their focus to Keenan Allen and DJ Moore within this offense, which is what they should do, because Rome is not better than those guys right now. So given the matchup, given the defense, and then on top of that, the role, I would sit Rome Odunze. Jalen Waddle versus the New York Jets. DJ Reed is expected to be playing. Sauce could not be playing, but regardless, Waddle's role has been very shaky. Even against a really limited cornerback group without Jair Alexander and the Packers, he barely saw any volume. You know, like, it wasn't a very electric game for him. Tyreek and Jonnu were the primary focuses, so Waddle just feels like a guy that is not very startable. I mean, he's just not putting up the explosiveness that you would have expected this season. I'm not sure why, but he just isn't. And if he is getting DJ Reed, it's that much more reason for him not to go off. So they could use him as a sacrificial lamb in this game. I wouldn't be surprised. Our fourth and final sit at wide receiver is going to be Elijah Moore versus Pittsburgh. Moore just was not very exciting the first time they played in the Snow Bowl. Jerry Jeudy was, David Njoku was. Those guys had great games, but Elijah Moore didn't. Maybe he has a little bit more volume if Cedric Tillman is out of this game, but I would expect Moore to be the one that is slowed down and Jeudy to probably continue his success. Moore is a pretty good player. Like, he's actually broken out a little bit with Jameis Winston. I just think that the way that Pittsburgh's linebackers are playing, the way their safeties are playing this year in the middle of the field, it makes it that much tougher for Elijah Moore. And really, Winston has just gained this great chemistry with Jeudy, and then on top of that, in the red zone, he's looking for Njoku. So Moore is kind of that third wheel, so to speak. At the tight end position, our 4 starts will start with Will Dissly versus Kansas City. I think he has a huge bounce back. He had a donut against Atlanta, which was a decent matchup. But this week, I think he has a very good matchup. Kansas City is one of the worst teams against tight ends. They're great against running backs. They're decent against receivers. But they're awful against tight ends. And if Ladd McConkey is beat up, his number 2 target is Will Dissly. So I expect Dissly on third down and in the red zone to see quite a few looks, especially if the Chargers are needing some points against Mahomes. Next, we've got Ferguson against the Bengals. As long as he's good to go off of the concussion, I think Ferguson will be the starting tight end for Dallas and also the guy that's converting third downs, that's beginning the drives with short completions. I just love how they are using their tight ends right now. I think Cooper Rush really loves to throw to the middle of the field and really loves to throw to the tight end because he doesn't have the strongest arm. So for him to throw to the perimeter is a little bit more difficult, but he does throw an accurate touch pass over the middle. And Cincinnati's linebackers, Cincinnati's defense, Cincinnati's pass defense is awful. They're bottom 10 against tight ends as well. So it's a good matchup on the surface. Cade Otton versus the Raiders. Otton should have a good game here. The Raiders struggled against the Chiefs tight ends in Gray and Kelsey. They've struggled lately against tight ends, and Otton is the number 2 receiver in this offense behind Mike Evans. I expect him to have success against the Raiders here in a game that could be pretty high scoring, so get Otton back in your lineup if he isn't already. Pat Freiermuth versus Cleveland. You could certainly do worse here. He had a decent game against Cleveland. Last week, he played really well. He scored a touchdown. The last 2 weeks, he had his 2 highest yardage totals of the season. He was worth the pickup. I think he's worth the start against Cleveland, the 11th worst team against tight ends, especially with no JOK. They're a lot worse against tight ends than they were earlier in the season. My tight end sits. Dalton Kincaid versus the Los Angeles Rams. Kincaid is coming back from an injury. I actually think that the receivers of the Bills, like Shakir and Cooper, are going to have big days, and I expect Josh Allen to be able to throw the ball to those guys. I think that Kincaid is probably going to be slowly involved into the game plan. I don't expect him to have a huge role if this is his week back in the lineup. I think Knox will still play quite a bit. They don't want him to be injured and derail him for the playoffs. They know how important the playoffs will be, and this game is not as big of a deal, so I think they're going to really ease him in as I knock my mic around. Cole Kmet versus the 49ers is going to be our second sit at the tight end position. Cole Kmet versus San Francisco. San Francisco is a really good defense against tight ends. They have been for a number of years because of Fred Warner. Kmet is a really inconsistent role in the offense, and I think that they've really focused on DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, right? And Kmet has really just not been a guy that, unless he has an amazing matchup, he's not going to be featured. That's just the way it is. So I'd stay away from him as a guy that, I know it's week 14. I know you need a pickup. I know you're probably desperate. I wouldn't go with Kmet. I'd go somewhere else. Kyle Pitts versus Minnesota. Pitts has just been awful as of late. I don't trust him against a team that has 3 capable safeties and a really complex system that might actually, keep him in to block, have him catch a lot of shorter passes, not a lot of vertical passes. Like, it's really tricky against the Vikings because you've got to be very careful with how you deploy your tight ends. So I think Kyle Pitts will be somebody that doesn't see a lot of volume, especially in the red zone where the Vikings are one of the best red zone defenses in football. So the touchdown ceiling isn't high either. Now we've got Mike Gesicki versus Dallas. Gesicki, my problem here is that I think the biggest problem with Dallas is the blitz packages they deploy. And with Gesicki, as long as he is, in the slot, he'll be fine, I guess, for a couple catches. But the thing is, we've seen a pretty big split between him and Tanner Hudson. And I could see Tanner Hudson playing a lot more in this game just because Dallas likes to put those 6 guys at the line of scrimmage, and they like to send blitzes, and they like to bluff, and you've got to deal with Micah Parsons. So just like Pitts, I think that you want more of the traditional tight end in the game more often, and Gesicki is probably not going to be involved as much because he's not a blocker, and I could also see having multiple tight end sets in the game as well to have some extra bodies to protect for Burrow, things like that, multiple back sets, things like that. So I think Gesicki is probably not going to be the primary option. I think they're going to look at Higgins, Chase pretty often, and then Yosibas across the middle if they go to 3 receiver looks. So yeah, those are my tight end sits as well, and our starts and sits for week 14, the ever important final week of the regular season. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to starts and sits for week 14. Don't forget to spike the like button and subscribe.